You want to be a part of history?
Not really.
Well, it's official. I'm never sleeping again. Ever.
Have you ever said, "This makes no sense," and someone tells you, "You're just not seeing it right"? Well, how do you know? You gotta know where to look and trust your own eyes. There are clues, even a template. Hello, I'm Lewis, and this is the Red Pill Diary. Come on in and join us. I've switched the lights on for you. It's May 7th, 1915, off Ireland's rugged coast. The RMS Lusitania, a Cunard marvel, glides through the fog. 1,959 souls aboard. Concealed below, gun cotton, tagged as furs, or cheese. A British wager in the World War's churn. Welcome to Means to an End, where history's darkest bets break loose. Today, we launch with the Lusitania. I'm Lewis.
And I'm Deborah.
We're going to unravel how 1,198 lives sparked a fight, from London's war rooms to a king's chilling question in Buckingham Palace. All right, Deb, we're going to kick this off with Lusitania. It's a Cunard ship. It's 1915, and this ship sinks with 1,200 people on board. And I'm telling you, Britain, something was going on here. They're playing it real close to chest. They kind of, really, if you're playing a board game, they rolled the dice hard. This is not some, I'm crossing the Atlantic trying to go the fastest I can to beat, the record and end up running into an iceberg. It seems like there's a game being played here, and it's really kind of creepy.
Isn't that something? To play a game with people's lives and these huge ships, they were just in the middle of it all.
Yeah, it wasn't no big thing like, oh, this is just bad luck, oopsie, we ran into something, etc. It's pure, there's strategy going on here as you start to read about the history. Let's say it starts in 1907. This is the part that gets you. Cunard builds her, but the Admiralty, the Britain's Navy, their brass, they shell out 2.6 million pounds to juice her up. Basically, looks like a luxury liner. She's got ballrooms, chandeliers, just like you would in pictures of the Titanic. But she's got gun mounts in the blueprints. She's a warship dressed up as fancy from day one, like an auxiliary cruiser, but called a luxury liner.
Oh my gosh. And all these people are on board thinking this is just a regular cruise ship kind of thing.
Okay, the passengers, they don't have a whiff of this. This is a dual role was the trick here. So let's just fast forward to May 1st, 1915. So she sets sail from New York. The 1,200 people are aboard, passengers, crew, all the works. The cargo's where it's really heats up here now. There's 4,200 rifle cartridge cases, 1,248 50 shrapnel shells, and those sketchy furs from DuPont's rail depot in New Jersey.
So furs doesn't make sense. I mean, it's a war zone.
Yeah, well, those furs, they were unearthed from FDR's private papers, as journalist, this guy named Colin Simpson, revealed. They weren't luxury goods. He pegged them as gun cotton, nitrocellulose. It's an explosive that was created at DuPont, their American chemical titans plant in New Jersey. During this period of time, it was massive. It was like 30,000 people. Came aboard overnight, or came active overnight. So this was all slipped on board for a front. Britain was counting on it, under wraps, so to speak, of course. But it wasn't coats that was explosive. The gun cotton's, it's a beast. It blows sky high if wet or hit. Now, Germany's, they got a whiff of this. So April 22nd, or at least they suspected. So they slap a warning on U.S. papers. They say, ships near Britain, fair game. Now, Britain's room 40, that's their code breaker. These code crackers, they catch it too because they'd already broke the code. So they knew this was going on ahead of time.
So they're tapping lines while she's steaming into trouble, huh?
Yeah, they nabbed this naval codes off this sunk Heidelberg in 1914. It was like that or early 15. They decoded this U-20s. What they decoded was the U-20s are prowling, or this one was prowling off of Ireland near Fastnet Rock. Churchill and Fisher, that's the two Admiralty top dogs at the time, they got the memo. And they knew that danger, like Danger Will Robinson, like danger in neon lights.
Well, I don't understand why that they would run out there And, you know, no guard, no protection. This ship is just going toward the sub.
Here's the deal. In May 7th, Lusitania is crawling at 18 knots, not the 25 knot max that she could be running at. Remember, she was considered like the Greyhound. She was sleek, slim, long. She had 4 masts, 4 pipes, stacks, but only 3 of them actually were functioning because the one was faux shaft, because everybody believed that it wouldn't be a luxury liner if you didn't have 4. But it still could do 25 knots. That was its max. But the problem with it during this wartime was coal was scarce. Now, that's one thing going on. And they had actually turned off, one boiler was dark, which means they only had 2. The interesting thing was they weren't zigzagging. That was the standard operation of the time to avoid subs, because they knew they were coming in and these subs were prowling. And the logs on these ships were pretty fuzzy and not necessarily as clear as they should have been. But Simpson, he calls it a setup. Now, historian David Ramsey blames it on sloppiness. It's kind of fishy, Deb. They slow her. They say it's because the coal's tight. Well, that's okay. But no escorts? That was standard operating procedure. Room 40, this code crackers, they're saying, Mayday, Mayday, red light, subs ahead. But Turner, the captain, he sails on. So May 7th, 2:10 p.m., off of Old Head Kinsale, this U-20 and the captain, Walter Schweiger, fires 1 torpedo, hits the starboard near the bridge.
Wow, just one then. I thought Britain said that there was multiple hits.
That's their spin. 2, 3 torpedo, Germany's savagery. That was kind of splashed pretty much everywhere, all over the world. But Schweitzer's log, he was the captain, he says 1. He only had 1 torpedo left. He was ready to go home. He was sitting there to fire off his last torpedo and then go home. It was a 440 pounds of bang. Now, the second blast that he actually documented was massive. It was unusual. That's what he wrote. Now, your question is, why would the captain of the submarine write something different? This is what he saw. He's going to turn it in. He's not thinking somebody's going to come in and investigate what he did. He writes it, and she's down in 18 minutes. 1,200 people died. Now, that's the cargo, is the gun cotton kicking in. Boom.
Wow, the Titanic even took hours to sink. So that definitely sped that along, all that gun cotton.
Well, if that's what it was, but it wasn't one torpedo, because one torpedo typically during that period of time wouldn't take down a massive ship this size. Like you said, the Titanic getting ripped side of a hole, like, massive rip on the side, took 2.5 hours. Whereas this Lusitania sunk in 18 minutes. This aftermath after that is really kind of a tangle of tales. It was a lot of spin going on here. Britain pushes this multiple torpedo. Now, this is in 1914, 1915. So, J.P. Morgan's got influence in the press, and he amplifies Huns butcher innocents. Now, that's the same morning in London that Colonel House. Now, this sinking happened. And the same morning in London, Colonel House was, of course, the advisor to Wilson during a period of time. He meets King George V, who says to him as he's musing out the window, just kind of somberly says, "What happens if they sink the Lusitania with Americans aboard?" And guess what? Hours later, it happens.
That's creepy.
Yeah, so it's like this master stroke. Britain needs the U.S., and the King's questions is really eerie, as you said, creepy. Now, Morgan is now bankrolling them. He's got, by the end of the war, he's bankrolled $3 billion. Now, he's the agent for the British in the United States to get all the goods to Britain. So he's desperate to get in because, of course, there's money to be had in any war. So Room 40's intel is locked in. Oh, it's a civilian liner. They're not going to say otherwise. They swear. And then the White House chats up the King like they're testing the odds. And guess what?
It's like a big chessboard. And the people, they were just pawns.
Yeah. And Simpson says, Britain's dangling the bait. Hours later, boom, 1,200 people died, 128 Americans. And in Washington, it's showdown Secretary of State William Jennings Bryan. Now, we've talked about him in a couple of episodes. And he wants to keep the peace. He's basically saying this tentacles of this money from the Morgan group are trouble. And Counsel Robert Lansing's like, war's our shot. Let's get in. So he says Morgan's our guy. He's pushing for Morgan. Now, there are indications that Morgan was the one pushing to get him in, and because he was favorable to this Morgan's group of financiers at the time.
Well, that makes sense. Morgan is pulling the strings. Money always does.
Yeah, remember, Brian's a dove. He hates war and the web it weaves. But post sinking, he's begging Wilson, stay neutral. Don't let Morgan drag us into this war, especially when no one in America wanted to be in the war. So those loans, and that effect, Wilson campaigned on not getting into the war because the war was going on.
Yeah, so much for that.
Well, he also knew that these loans are going to trap us. Lansing, on the other hand, he's a hawk. We've seen that before. He sees 1,200 people dead as the push that Germany's the villain, Morgan's the lifeline. So Brian quits. He basically resigns in June of 15. Now, there's a lot more going on there because at the time Lansing was talking to Wilson every time Brian left the office and getting things accomplished behind Brian's back. So that wasn't too kind of an interaction between the two, to say the least. But Brian quits. He says no entanglements, but Lansing takes over and he pushes Wilson warward. And, by 17, we know we're in it.
Yeah, Morgan on his little tentacles, he's definitely been pulling the strings.
Oh, big time. It's, Wilson's torn, but Lansing starts to really push and Wilson follows. So Morgan's cash needs more to pay it off, right? He wants it to pay off. And that king and house line, suppose they sink, smells like Britain's kind of hoping. But historians, they're split. Simpson, he says that it's hot on. They're trying to get 1,200 lives for America. And Ramsey plays it safe, says, well, it's just war slop, not plot.
Huh. Safe, right? They decode the subs. They pack ammo. They ditch escorts. I mean, it's terrible.
Yeah, sloppy or not, 1,200 people died and they're cashing in. So Massey is he's another historian. He's kind of in between. He's saying it's a kind of a calculated risk, not bait. War's thin, got 18 knots, no escorts, 1 torpedo. That really does it. But munitions blow it big. That's what he says. Now, I read some information during this period of time where that wasn't necessarily the case. They had actually tested to see if all those munitions would explode at one time, and they did not. Now, if you have gun cotton, you don't need a lot of big explosion. You just need one little one right in the middle of the gun cotton. Simpson says, he kind of felt like they planned it. And Ramsey's like, this is oopsie. Britain kind of rolls the dice on this. King's like, what would happen, do you think, if it was sunk with Americans on board? And, at the end of the day, Morgan and Lansing are cashing checks.
Yep. Massey's war tough. Simpson's, well, they mean it. It's terrible. The king adds the spice.
Then they buried it. They buried it because of pride and pragmatism. If you admit she's armed in 1915, Germany's got fair target, right?
Yeah.
Because U.S. might balk at that point. Morgan's loans wobble. He's not going to make a lot of money because America's not going to get in the fight. Might not even supply arms to Britain because the American public and the international community say, hey, wait a minute here. And Germany's going to push back, of course. If that happens, Brian wins. The tragic liner hooks. So it took until actually 1982 when Britain hinted, oh, by the way, salvagers, there's dangerous cargo aboard. Well, right. Well, in 2008, of course, divers nabbed 4 million rounds of shrapnel. Now, it starts to creep out.
Yeah, that's typical, right? The decades go by and they just hide things and then they let little bits of pieces of information out at a time.
Absolutely, when they have to. They'll keep the lie until such time as that something leaks. And once it leaks, it's a slow drip. Essentially what they do, at least in this case here, and we're going to see this going forward, it's a blueprint. They hold on to the lie, and whatever that is that their intentions were in the beginning, there's this risk that they assume. When something happens that counters that narrative they've set, whether it be by drip or by inadvertent or FOIA request or whatever that would be, then they turn around and they spin it with just enough information to offset the pushback they're getting, and then they hold tight until something else hits, and then they repeat. And they keep doing this, and you're going to see this pattern, this blueprint play out over and over again. So, it comes down to they hold the intel, lives are risks, truth then becomes a spin that they want to spin it for. Now, just wait until we hit Pearl Harbor, JFK, Ukraine, and others. The Lusitania is where we're going to start. And we're going to start to see the means to an end with no apologies. So next time, in our next episode, we're going to leap to mustard gas and the Reichstag fires. And we're going to see how World I's poison and the Nazi fire fueled the same game. So in this series, we've titled it Means to an End, and we're going to show where history's bets don't stay buried. So subscribe, rate us, and follow us along because we'll be back. And until next time, we'll leave the lights on for you. Well, we filled those pages. If you have comments, suggestions, share them. You know, the more input, the more likely a better outcome. I'm moving forward because backwards is not an option. I've turned the lights on here, and I'll be leaving it that way. Join me next time on The Red Pill Diary.